but it's okay. There we are. So I'm just going to pause that. So Jayowich is Misha NAomi of Dream Waters Wellness, Holistic Navigation. And up and coming, I have a collaboration with Bindi White Crow of White Crow Wisdom. And we're going to do a little collaboration called Journey to Your Bliss, or Journey to Bliss. And so we're going to have that coming up in August 25th in Victoria, Lekwungen territory. And today I just wanted to get to know Bindi a little better and find out and share a bit with all y'all about who we're going to be collaborating with in the near future. So Bindi, can you tell us a bit about your practices, your process, and your values that you've got going on with the different women's temples and the work that you do here?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much. Nice to be with you today this way. My given name is Bindi, and the name I've been gifted almost like a muse for me is White Crow. So I am still very much growing into the spirit of what White Crow really is. She, from my understanding so far, is a wise elder woman in a culture that doesn't really value its women or its elders much, but as an opportunity to really step into embodying wisdom. And carving a bit of a pathway to allow it to be easier for women in our culture as they age to own their wisdom, share their wisdom, and really ultimately help guide us all in terms of sort of, in my sense is this beautiful shift of coming back into better balance with the divine feminine as really the healing our planet needs. And so that's a little bit about White Crow. I am passionate about, it's a funny thing to say, but passionate about tending to grief. And it is, it's my karma. You know, I have lived a life of deep, deep, deep loss, many things since I was a child. And at a certain point, I started to understand that it was in fact preparing me rather than punishing me in some way. And so all of, as is the story for so many of us that want to serve in healing ways, often what has felt like trial, tribulation, and poison ultimately becomes our medicine. And so I know how hard it has been for me to work with my own grief. And I really want to help bring us all back into a great relationship with grieving. It is such a natural, fundamental, and powerful part of being alive. And so that's a kind of my mission, I think. And my passion is the rise of the divine feminine, supporting with working with women in an embodied sense of our own innate divinity. I've studied in many paths, and I'll be happy to talk about that, and they've all gifted me beautiful things. But ultimately, it feels to me like our spirituality is this unique mix of who we are, how we understand, and then engage in the world. And,
yeah, and I imagine that's one of the things that naturally resonated with us, is that we both seem to slide more towards the perennialist view of things, which is where we see the similarities between the mystical practices and then like what is the conglomeration of my heart, like with these grounded practices that have come into my being, and then what is the combination. And I think both of us seem to have a similar way of working where we've studied particular paths, we've grounded in particular ways, but then now we're at this phase of what does it mean to bring this offering forward, and what is my heart's offering in this understanding. So you've mentioned you've studied many paths. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what are the different spiritual paths you've embarked upon at different phases in your experience?
Sure. With great humility, because I'm so much a student still and always, you know. In one way, I've been reflecting on this a lot lately. In one way, I've always been a student, you know. As a child, I knew how rocks felt, and I spoke to the fairies. And so in some way, that has always been present in my life. But in earnest, with kind of conscious commitment, I think it's been about 20 years. And I spent a good deal of time. It was interesting coming into conscious kind of spiritual seeking as an adult. It occurred for me at a time when I had discovered that so many of my beliefs were not necessarily true. Like one of the most powerful insights of my entire spiritual journey, although not complicated but deeply impactful, was learning that I didn't have to believe everything I thought, you that pivotal moment where we
Mm-hmm.
start to understand that our mental monologue is a mental monologue, not actually who we are.
Mm-hmm.
But when that started to break for me, I became curious, because suddenly I was like, wow, if that's not true, then maybe none of these things that I believed, limiting beliefs, are true. And then I became really curious, deeply, deeply curious for the first time as an adult, and started seeking in really kind of innocent, beautiful ways. I would go, well, maybe I was wrong about Christianity, and so I tried going to church. And the day I showed up to go to a Christian church was the one Sunday a month that it started at a different time. And I said, okay, not that door. I'll try a different door, And then I went and I sat with a Buddhist Sangha, because I didn't know anything about Buddhism, and it felt really good. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll try some more of this and see how that feels. And it was really exploring in that way. And so I've touched on many things. I studied in Zen, a couple of different Zen streams in parallel for about 12 years. So Robert Aitken Roshi's Diamond Sangha, for anyone who's familiar, which is a beautiful blend of a couple of traditional paths, and then Thich Nhat Hanh's mindfulness traditions. And Zen gave me a deep sense of internal discipline, which I think I had been lacking. It gave me a deep, deep, deep sort of steeped experience of what inner peace can feel like after having a lot of turmoil and challenge and sadness and just internal drama for a long time. And it really taught me not everything, but a lot about the way my mind works, in a way where I could cohabitate, whatever I am, can cohabitate with whatever the mechanism of the mind body is in a more peaceful way. And I loved, one of the things I loved so much about my Zen practice was form and ritual. The beauty of how ritual can move us. It's very hard to put it into language. It's such an embodied experience, but just incredibly powerful. And then I started to shift my attention more toward feminine embodied practices. And it wasn't that I was looking for that. What happened was I came across the Awakening Women's Institute, which is run by a woman named Shalom Ark. And she has a beautiful backstory that really resonated for me. I won't get into it here, but a beautiful story about her whole path of practice and how she kept feeling like she would study and practice, seeking enlightenment. And as soon as she would leave her meditation cushion or the ashram, she would fall back into these patterns that we all have, and would be deeply disappointed in herself. And at a certain point, she started to realize that part of the challenge was many of these paths were seeking to move out of the body, like trying to evolve beyond the human experience. And she started to turn her attention to what would it mean as a female in particular to have all of my spiritual divinity entirely anchored in the human experience. And she dove into goddess mythology study. And her whole approach has been to find keys to what our own female intuitive sense of divine is in the myth itself. And that practice has been deeply, deeply nourishing and very fruitful for me. Yeah.
And so within Zen, is there an embodiment deity practice that as there is with the goddess worship work, or did you find that there wasn't quite the same invocation?
Not quite the same. I mean, there are some crossovers for sure. There's certainly in the Zen path, the Buddha is treated both as a man and a myth, and you can look at it, and depending on your path of Buddhism, there's the Taras and Avalokiteshvara and the embodiment of Kadasha. So there is some godlike, some deity-like concentration of various different aspects, but it isn't. It isn't the same in finding it in your body necessarily, the way this is, the physicality. The other thing I found is, and I think this is true in many paths, just the long-standing inadvertent overlay of the patriarchy very much in it. And I would find myself at times in my Zen practice bucking up against it. And I'm wanting to just dive in with deep devotion, but unable to when I would run into things, especially teachings about somehow the body is impure and, sexual desire is a bad thing. And I was just like, I don't understand how we can be, like, it's a bad setup. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, and this is the thing, like, so the upward pointing star is the worship of the mind and of that ascension and the desire of an enlightenment and out of the body.
Yeah.
And the path is to leave the Maya, the illusion, and to leave this like earthly longing and suffering and the things of this plane. The downward pointing star has been demonized, but originally the downward pointing star means worshiping the earth, worshiping the physical, means wine, drink, pleasure, pain. It means being in the relishing aspects of the physicality of the body. And so a lot of the faiths, though, that are aimed at enlightenment, it is the upward pointing star. It is that let's head out of the body, let's transcend the Maya. But there is practices that are devotional to the physical form. And they've been demonized, they've been slandered, they've been harmed, and they've been turned away. But I think it has been to our detriment because we are in physical embodiment here. So there is an aspect of me that prefers the bodhisattva pathway, and is that of like incarnating here to alleviate suffering. And there's an aspect of me that really does love living, when I hear people say, oh, I'm not coming back my next life. This is it. I'm not doing this ever again. One, good luck. You're set to figure out what you're set to figure out. You're coming back until that's done, honey, whether or not you say you're not coming or not. So that's just my personal, I don't think we have that much autonomy about how much we come back because we set to figure something out.
Yeah.
But the other aspect of it is why would you not enjoy the bitter and the sweet? And it's because you can really only know the beauty of this life by understanding all the aspects of what of the flesh. Yeah. And so I love the Shakti teachings when coming across the understanding that these goddesses live within us. And so when you can identify the different moods that are arriving, and then you can go to that particular goddess, understand that goddess is arriving in you, and then work with the mantras, work with the touch, work with the comprehension of what aspect of the Shakti, that feminine aspect within self, is needing in that moment, and nurture from that point. I love that aspect of it. And then the bringing in, the inviting in of the mantra, the deity, the goddess, and how much these beings then do enliven and enrich our lives is just so tangible, and it's so beautiful. So I'm really excited about sharing these practices of the differences, because it's, there's so many different ways and so many different flavors that are so enriching.
Yes.
And but I do agree that it's at some point it is nice to drop into somewhere that has more of this earthly devotional presence to the body.
Yeah, it's a beautiful. I love your reflections. I find the different aspects of the goddess. I mean, there's just so very, very many, but it's so permission giving for me personally. In a culture that's kind of defined what we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to be, and even as we're trying to find our way in opposition to that stuff, there's still this sense of being somehow chained by all of that belief. And I find different aspects of the divine feminine to just be like when I see the fierceness of Kali or whatever, even she's often the one that we go to first, but there's so many, that it says it is really righteous and okay to access that, to feel that, and to allow that to be alive in you. In fact, that is too divine, and so I love that freedom that comes with some of that practice. The other thing I was thinking of is, we are in at least two dimensions, arguably many, many more, but even if you just said two, this kind of physical form and some other energetic form, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, the dreaming body. We all dream. We all know there's a world we walk in.
It makes sense if we're in at least two different forms simultaneously, that both the desire to kind of transcend and the desire to ground and be home and whole belong together. You know, they belong together, and part of, you know, spiritual practice for me is becoming that. I love the imaginal. I love the realm of dreaming, of creation, of that can happen in this more disembodied state. It's beautiful and powerful and amazing, and it's one aspect. I'm still here in a body too, and I want to be here wholly and happily and fully in this body. The other thing I was going to say is I think this particular offering that we're planning around Journey to Bliss is so deeply resonant for me in the amount of suffering that we all experience in our life, which you can never compare. It is what it is, and we have our own unique flavor and journey, but the amount of challenge and loss and suffering and grief has made me more acutely in love with bliss where and as I can find it and cultivate it. Not to avoid and get away from what is challenging, but it's almost like the harder things have been, the equal and opposite potential opportunity for bliss exists. And so I feel that there's so much magic in both all of what we're talking about, like the embodiment and the ownership of our experience, including our pain and challenge, but also the bliss that can come.
Yeah, I found for years I went the hard way, and I was always doing hard things the hard way. I'd wait till I was really sore in my physical body, and then I would go for a really painful massage. And I was like, oh yeah, it's good, you know, like, oh. And then when I was in Australia, I went to do an exchange with another practitioner, and she was a body worker, and like arrived, and she's like, oh yeah, I do remedial massage, but I also do tantra, and I do more like a lighter, energetic. And I was like, well, whatever you feel is an equal exchange. Like, I'm happy for whatever, you know, I'm here, I'm putty. So I had this really beautiful massage, and it was not at all, there wasn't a stitch of pain in it through any of the touch, any of the movements, any of the motions. And it was very like sensual and intimate and erotic, but it wasn't like this into the full erotic zones.
Yes.
And after I left, I was in this like elated state in my body, and I just felt so juicy and alive. And I was like, I'm allowed to have this. You know, and I realized I had all these layers of, I can't walk around aroused. That's not allowed. That's shameful. That's, you know, but here I am stepping out of the house, and I'm in this giddy, elated, like I just feel just drunk. And but there was no strings attached. There was no necessity of aftercare, relationship attendance. Like, it was just a beautiful receiving of this touch and this nurture and just bliss in my body. And that's when I realized, well, actually I'm allowed. And nobody knows. I'm having like a titillating experience in my physical body. Nobody knows that. Like, all that's happening is I'm emanating an air of confidence and joy. And as long as I'm not like, hey, and being all thirsty with it, directing it at people, you know, and I'm just keeping that sense of just like in myself, it doesn't actually, it's not a negative thing. And I had all these layers of concern coming up about what I'm going to attract and how I have to be careful. And then I just peeled that away, and I realized, like, I am welcome to be in bliss. And around that time, Nefertin came in. So like the Blue Lotus, which I really love working with. And so I started to work with Blue Lotus extract and Blue Lotus teas and doing a mix of herbs to help move grief. This is also another aspect of my curiosity is grief, and how do we process it healthily, and using these different practices to assist us in balancing and coming into connection. So I was drinking these teas, and then I'm working with Nefertin and invoking Nefertin. And I love doing invocations through mantra, through embodiment of texture and taste and food, and different ways to work with the deities. So I'm working with Nefertin and enjoying this hello that's happening. And then next thing you know, all of a sudden, all these beautiful perfuming oils and body oils and things come into my life. And I'm this little chemist, and it's 3 drops of oud and 2 drops of grapefruit, and I'm smelling it, and I'm spilling these aphrodisiac oils by accident all over my body, and I'm rubbing them into myself as I'm drinking these big pots of aphrodisiac tea, and I'm doing these invocations to Triparta Sundari and Shiva to help balance her, and bringing in this, and all of a sudden I'm experiencing these just orgasms
Yes.
at my table, and because of all of these aspects of embodiment that are coming through to me. And it was just this hilarious moment of just bringing in and inviting and allowing and embracing, like, bliss. And through invocations and through communications to the deities and requesting, and then asking La Lalita Triparta Sundari to step in and bring in her ecstatic bliss body and come through my being. And then inviting Shiva in, and then inviting in Nefertin to share with me, and this perfuming that just naturally came, and then the teas. And it was this really just like awakening moment of like, right, I am allowed to be pleasurable in eating. I'm allowed to be in pleasure in walking. I'm allowed to be in pleasure in my body as my self-care practice in the morning. And so I'm just really excited to be bringing all of these little things together that have been coming through, and to meet and mold and meld and see what kind of baby is birthed in this reverence of ritual process that both of us have grounded in. And just to come to share.
I'm so excited, and I love your description. Like, I love it so much. I'm very much in that inquiry. The last number of plant ceremonies that I've been involved in, the message that keeps coming through is pleasure is the source of your power, repeatedly, very clearly. And I am working with it, and I do believe like that has been part of the limitation of our feminine power and energy has been this, that feeling too much pleasure is bad, and it is shameful or greedy or whatever.
Or you're going to attract attention, and it's your fault.
And it's your what were you wearing and all that bullshit.
Yeah, you were emanating the sexual energy. So.
Yes, and I think that a big part of our returning to wholeness is really finding each of us in our individual, finding our pathway back into that. I believe, like, why else were we given senses? It wasn't just to escape danger, it was also to drink in beauty and pleasure and delight.
And coming to that balance that we are half star and half earth, and so we aren't here just, in my opinion, we're not here to just head out. We're here to be in the body and to find that nice in between place of like, how do I bring this divine stellar energy to the earth plane, and how do I bring these earthly things to the stars?
I love it so much.
So very beautiful. So anybody who's tuning in, this is Bindi. You can find information about Bindi at www.whitecrowwisdom.ca. So more about Bindi and the beautiful things that come about. For myself, www.dreamwaterwellness.com, and you can find out more about myself. But together, we're going to be doing something on August 25th at 111 Superior Street at the Church of Truth at 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. And it's going to be Journey to Bliss. We're going to be exploring some mantras, some embodiment, some ways to tune into your earthly body and your stellar body through all of the ways that we've spoken of here today. So come enjoy some tea, come enjoy some gentle touch. We're going to explore some scents, and we're going to explore some different ways that we have come to know yourself better.
I'm super excited. I'm really excited to explore the offering together with others. I would just add also, it is a free offering, so just come. Don't let money worry you. And I hope to see you there.
And thank you to Neighbourhood Small grants for funding this little journey. There's going to be other offerings coming about as I grab little grants, but this first one here, I was like, ta-da! Let's bring this human in. So thank you, Neighbourhood Community Small grants out of Vancouver. And if you like the stuff that's coming up, we're going to be doing more of these little couchside talks with different peers, different healers, different practitioners within the community the world over. So like, subscribe, and